Hi, welcome back to Iris After Hours. We are still in Fresno, and I am honored to be here with Ford Taylor. And we're becoming good friends already, I feel like.
Absolutely.
He is an incredible businessman, an amazing consultant around the world for businesses and companies. He's developed what's called transformational leadership. There you go. A teaching series, something that's been really effective in helping businesses get to where they want to go and to relationally make sure their employees are on the same level and working well together. And he just finished a couple days with all of our Iris staff, which is so exciting. And thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be with you and to be with the Irish people and to be with you specifically. Thank you.
We love having you. And so walk me through in a nutshell what transformational leadership is.
Wow, that's a big question.
That's a big question.
Oh, you know, years ago, I did a lot of travel. And when I traveled all around the world, I found something that didn't really surprise me, but I didn't do much with it. And everywhere I went, I found a lot of really smart people. I mean, everybody I met was smart, gifted, or talented in some area. Mm-hmm. And almost everybody I met had huge hearts. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really do much with it. And in that travel, you know, we grew a company and it got really big and all that. And of course, then I had a huge fall. Because I became very arrogant around thinking I was God's gift to business. And thank goodness my wife forgave me. But I then stayed home, and God got a hold of me and ended up staying home for almost 10 years without traveling because I wanted to finish strong at home with my kids. But even as I did that and did the consulting and the ministry work without a lot of travel, limited travel, still everywhere I went, I saw people that everywhere I met were smart, gifted, or talented with huge hearts. And so I started asking the question, you know, what's missing? You know, there's all this great leadership stuff out there, but why is it that if all the people that are smart and have big hearts, why is that not who we're reading about in the paper? Why is that not who's in the media? Why are we reading about all the smart people that maybe their hearts aren't so big? And I started looking at it and realizing that it's not that people don't want to be those kinds of leaders that can really make a positive change. I realized they just didn't have the tools, the ingredients, and the recipe to be able to do that. They had the theory, but no one, it's like, you know, knowing about great coffee, but no one ever really gives you the coffee beans and the coffee grinder and the water and the cups, but they can tell you it's great coffee.
Yeah.
And so transformational leadership, there you go. There you go. And so I started realizing that leadership is literally like making a cake. And when you put stuff in a cake, some things in that cake taste really good on their own, but other things don't taste very good on their own at all.
Yeah.
You'd never go have a cup of flour for lunch, or most of us wouldn't have raw eggs for breakfast.
Most of us wouldn't.
Right.
I wouldn't.
But for some reason, when you mix some of those things that don't taste very good along with some things that do, and if you have the right kind of bowl and you mix them just right and you cook them at the right temperature, you know, that cake tastes pretty good. And that's the way leadership is. But most of us just want the chocolate and the water and the milk. We aren't really willing to put the flour and the raw eggs in our cake. So we try to do a blend of giving people those ingredients, tools with a recipe manual to be able to do that.
And this is something relevant for businesses, organizations, individuals, all across the board?
Yeah. One of the biggest problems, I remember, you know, we just released our second book a couple months ago, and my goal was to write that in 2014 and finally got it done in 17. But I remember back in 2015, I think it was late 15 or early 16, a publisher called me about the book, and I went to meet with him, and he had read our first book, and when we showed up, he had two other publishers with him, and typically publishers would be considered competitors. And after about a 2-hour meeting, my wife was like in the last 30 minutes of it, and after about a 2-hour meeting, I asked him this question. I said, why did you bring two other publishers to this meeting? And he said, well, your material is really presenting us a problem. And I said, what is that? He said, well, we read your first book, and we read the first chapter of your second book.
Okay.
And he said, the problem is, in the book publishing world, you have to have a category. You know, is it leadership? Is it Christian leadership? Is it self-help?
Okay.
Is it for mothers? Is it for business people? Is it for classroom teachers? And he said, our problem with your book is that it's for everybody.
Universal.
And he said, we truly don't know where to put it. And so I brought some help asking them, could they help me know where to put your book? And so, we found that it works in every sphere. And there's a reason for that.
Okay. What is the reason? I'd love to know that.
Well, it's okay. Well, I told you a little bit about my rise and fall, and after that fall, after God got a hold of me, I was doing business consulting and then doing full-time ministry work, but just consulting, 3 or 4 days a month for income, and then giving the rest of my time away. And one of my clients called me in his office one day, and he closed the door, and he said, "I have a question for you." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "How often, when you go into businesses, because you've been doing this a long time, and I mean, the first business we grew became the number one in our industry in America. So it was Brazos. It ended up being called. It started off being CC Creations, and then the corporate name as we got bigger and bigger.
It was a sportswear apparel company.
Right, a decorated sportswear apparel
Over $300
company.
million.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Straight out of business school? Did you start that out of business school?
No, I worked at a sporting goods store for a couple of years, and then another sporting goods store for 1 year.
Okay.
And then at the sporting goods store, I got a call from the banker telling me they were going to close down our screen printer, the person that put numbers and names on uniforms and stuff, and to go find another one. And then a couple of days later, they called back and said, "Hey, would you like to own this company?"
Whoa!
Yeah, so you're 24 years old, you never thought about it. And so we took on the debt, and instead of them putting it out of business, we took it over.
Okay.
And over the next 9 years, we had a lot of success. Then some venture capitalists called us and said, "We'd like to put money in and use your strategy and our money and go bigger." And so then for 7 more years, we did that. And so we bought broken companies, would go in and fix those companies, put a management team in place, and they would grow their own company when I'd go buy another one, and then go in and fix it and then do another one. And then in that, like I say, it was good news, bad news. It was, a lot of business success. On the outside, looked really strong. I mean, family looked good, marriage looked good, spiritual gifts pastored our church.
And what was the challenge in that? Where did the brokenness come in?
Well, the brokenness came in, I would leave home on Sunday evenings, afternoons at 4 o'clock, or Monday mornings at 4 o'clock, and drive to Houston, Texas, hop on a plane, and then fly to Cincinnati, Ohio. And I would get home at midnight on Friday nights.
Wow.
And in that, I did that for 23 months. And in that, I was feeling, which is crazy as I look back on it, a lot of rejection and hurt and pain. And reality is, who should have been feeling rejected? Because I was self-centered and selfish. And I was sexually abused by a female school teacher when I was 6 years old. And I had not realized the impact that had on me. And so I was always flirting it up with people, with other women, and, coming on, not really intending to do anything. But then over time, I finally fell to a temptation that was, that I was not able to fight off. So I ended up cheating on Sandra. And again, a spiritual gifts pastored our church, and on the outside, we looked really strong, like the perfect couple and the perfect family. And
incredibly successful.
Yeah. And then thank goodness, as the spiritual gifts pastor, once I took it, after our pastor asked me to take it over with his wife, I wrote this.
To take what over?
The spiritual gifts pastorship. In other words, our senior pastor and his wife were the spiritual gifts pastor.
Okay.
As we grew, he asked me, would I step into his role? Okay. And when I did it, I wrote an
Had you been through healing at this point yet? No.
Not at all. I tell people, go Google the word leadership, hypocrite, businessman, spiritual gifts pastor. My picture pops up.
Wow. Okay.
And anyway, is that good? Did you have another question on that?
No. Keep going.
Anyway, and so I wrote this interview with Anita, this interview process. So if everybody came to the class, we would take individuals through it 2-on-1. And being raised Southern Baptist, I was seeing things I had not seen before. And in every 2-on-1 interview, we were seeing a miracle.
Really?
Literally. And my pastor and his wife, who were spent 33 years in Cyprus, Israel, and Africa, then came back and spent 11 years in our church. They were telling me, we've never seen anybody pray and see the miracles you see.
Physical miracles?
Physical.
Wow.
Documented, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual.
Was that
deliverance.
something you'd seen before?
No, I didn't even believe in it.
Okay.
I'd been told that stuff didn't happen.
Wow.
And my whole life, I got the 13-year pins. I never missed church, So I'm like, I'm completely whacked out. Literally at times I was holding a loaded gun in my hand. And praying, literally driven to the bridge of the river. I was a one whacked out guy.
This is happening, though, in you internally while you're seeing these miracles happening?
Absolutely.
And you're not even sure how you're seeing these miracles happening? It's just something
I am telling you, I'm beating on my steering wheel all the way home after every time we're seeing this, screaming out, God, what about me?
Wow.
What about me? Because when I was in high school, I believe I had a visitation from God. And when I shared that with my pastor, he told me God didn't do things like that anymore. And then when I was in my mid-30s, it happened again, same message. And then he told me, same pastor in a different town, same denomination, but he said God didn't work that way anymore. Now, since that time, both of them have apologized. But I didn't know what to do with that. I mean, because I didn't have anybody to nurture or mentor the things that was happening.
Yeah.
And so now let's move forward to Cincinnati. And so we wrote this interview process, and these things were going on. And then one day, Dale and Anita came to me and said, hey, the three of us have never been through the interview process. So why don't the three of us interview each other? Because, you wrote it after, and I said, sure. Now, if I'd have thought about it,
And this is an interview process for people to come into...
To help them with their spiritual gifts. So we teach the spiritual gifts class.
Yep.
And then every individual we would take aside 2-on-1, and they'd fill out this paperwork, would give them tapes, books, and help them with their gifts.
Which is something you developed and wrote out.
Yeah, well, I used, I combined people's stuff. I mean, I didn't just come up with it from scratch, but I'm the one that put it in the form we were using it.
Yep.
And again, all these things were taking place, but we were helping them with their gifts, not only to use inside the church, but use in their, what I call workplace, whether they were stay-at-home mom, business, wherever, but to use their gifts no matter where they were operating.
Okay.
And again, so it came, so the three of us said, let's interview each other. I would have said no if I'd have thought about it. I mean, I clearly would have said no. But
so you had an understanding of the spiritual gifts, but not prior to this of
I didn't believe in them.
You didn't believe in them, but you're teaching them you're like...
I'm teaching them.
That's incredible.
I mean, it's crazy. I know it sounds crazy. That's why I tell people. But anyway, so let me tell this, and we'll come back to it, and then then we can go to the crazy piece.
Sure.
Okay? You'll find you've already found that before the interview started, so we're good.
Awesome.
And then, and in my interview, the same thing happened to me that happened to everybody else. I mean, they were asking me the questions, and I'm kind of a left brain thinker more so then than now, and I was answering them all before they finished the question because I wrote them.
Yeah.
So I'd cut them off halfway through.
Okay.
And I'll never forget one question. Anita looked at me because the question was written, if you could do whatever you wanted to do with your life, what would you do? But she changed. She looked at me and she said, if you could do whatever. And I cut her off and I said, I'm doing it. Spiritual gifts pastor. I'm a beautiful wife, 3 great kids. I'm doing consulting. It's like, it's great. I'm getting to consult. I don't have all the responsibility of owning a company. Life is good. I'm doing just what I want to do.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she said, she's from Southern Oklahoma, and she said, would you just hush up a minute? I'll never forget this. And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, I want to ask that question a little differently for you. And I said, okay. And she said, if you could do whatever you knew God called you to do, what would you do? And I was shot. I mean, I completely lost it. And I won't go into the detail because we won't finish the interview if I do. But I'll tell you that I walked out of that room absolutely knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that Paul's Damascus road trip took place.
Wow.
And they tell people, I don't know about today because they were with us and they went back to Israel for 7 years, and so I'm not as close to them as I was. But I do know at one point when they were still there, they were telling people they'd never seen anything close like the manifest presence of God like we saw in that office that day. And so thank goodness God got a hold of me, and he used my own questions basically to wake me up.
Wow. That is incredible. Walk me through. You were so good at creating these systems and questionnaires about even something that you didn't believe in. Walk me through accepting a role like that when you were like, I don't necessarily believe in this. Just seems like a good idea, though.
I mean, how do you describe being a man of faith that you believe God's visited you twice, and both times your pastor said God wouldn't call you to do that? I'm now doing what both of those visitations were.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm walking that out now.
Yeah.
But how do you explain that? How do you explain being in church your whole life and then following the way I fell? How do you explain getting asked to be the spiritual? I mean, it's all, at that point, it was all about looking good.
Wow.
I mean, it was all about putting on a good front. It was all about how people saw me. And of course I look now, where Jesus said, you'll prophesy in my name, you'll heal in my name, you'll preach in my name, I'll say I never knew you. He might have written that for me.
Wow.
I don't know, but there's a possibility that could have been me for a season.
You still had that gifting. You knew how to pull it out of people and how to get them to self-assess.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just got completely encountered yourself.
Yes.
In the end. And from that, was there a marked difference in life after that point?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Pretty radical.
And so I basically laid down the business I had and went in.
Which was the same business, the sports apparel?
No,
different?
I'd been out of that for a year and a half.
Okay.
Okay. And we won't go into that detail, but I received 5 prophetic words leading up to me being gone. And the first one was a taped together note brought to me by an employee who had gone to a prophetic conference. You got to remember, I didn't believe in the prophetic.
Right.
And it basically was around me cheating on my wife and telling me to stop, from a man I'd never met that didn't live in our town. And this guy sent me 5 messages, and I literally said, I'd never seen anybody that could predict the future or predict something like this man could. That's the words I would use. And the 5th one was something emotionally devastating is going to happen to you, but God's hand on it. And if you'll be obedient, he'll take care of you. And I asked this lady, I said, what's going to happen? She said, I don't know. When's it going to happen? She said 3 weeks. And 3 weeks to the day, at this point, we were a public company.
That emotionally something devastating is going to happen?
It's going to happen to you, but God's hands on it. And if you'll be obedient, he'll take care of you. Because everybody thought I was this great Christian at the time. So giving me these words, I'd say, I'd just shake my head.
No
even
one
though
really
I didn't believe
knew
it.
what was going on.
Well, one person did.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Of course.
Actually, 3, but anyway.
Yeah.
And I said, what's going to happen? She said, I don't know. What's going to happen 3 weeks? And I had told our board that I would move to Cincinnati for 2 years and then move back to Texas. And at the end of the first year, I told them I'm ready to bring somebody else in and develop them, and then I would leave. Well, so I'd had that conversation. Well, 3 weeks to the day from getting that word, the chairman of our board flew to Cincinnati and met me in the lobby of a hotel and handed me my papers and said, if you don't want to be CEO, we don't need you anymore.
Wow.
And I literally went into the funk of all funks because my whole identity was in that company. And I said, okay, maybe there might be something to this prophetic thing. But I mean, he knew to the day what was going to. I've still never met the man. His name's Michael Ratcliffe. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was people in Cincinnati, when I told them the story, they also, we know that guy. He can walk in a room and call you by name. But again, that was outside my.
And that's a year and a half before your healing encounter, right?
That was.
That's you leaving the big company.
That was 3. Yeah, the first one was about a year and a half before. The last one was 3 weeks before.
Okay, yeah.
But then I left and started doing something else. Okay, and then this happened, the encounter with my pastor and his wife.
Wow.
And then I left the something else. So a year and a half after I left the old company, this happened, the encounter with my, and I finished up with the clients we had there, which took about 6 months. And then I walked out to start saying, God, what is it you want me to do? And then I was consulting.
Yep.
Now we're back to where we started. Is that okay? And one of my clients called me in the room and said, this material that you're teaching us, how often do you get these kinds of results? And you've got this history of growing this huge company. You consult with companies, and you're doing the city-reaching stuff and your ministry stuff. And I said, yeah. He said, how often do you get these kind of results in companies? And I said, every time. And
these kind of results meaning
more
really
profits,
great results.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'll tell you what this particular client said.
Okay.
Because he's actually on our team now. He actually came to me.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so so this was like 12 years ago, but he's actually a part of our team starting about 3 years ago because he said, I don't like what I do as much as what you do. So he left that and he works with us now.
Cool.
But what he actually said was, our company, in 18 months is 6 times bigger and 10 times more profitable. My marriage is like it's never been. My employees are happier than they've ever been. I mean, he spelled it all out. He said our turnover's down. Our customers are happier. Our clients, I mean, it's crazy the difference. I mean, he closed the door and laid all that out and said, how often do you get these kinds of results? I said, every time.
His marriage was better than
Oh,
it's
no
ever
question.
been.
I mean, if you ever
That's the part that's just incredible to me.
The stories around, that's what people say. Don't you love showing people how to make all this money? Not near as much as I love sitting in a boardroom and hearing an 80-year-old man tell his 52-year-old son for the very first time in his life, I love you and I'm proud of you. You know, that
because
to
it's
me,
that all-encompassing.
it's all that, that's right.
Wow.
That's right. So, and to get the question of why does all your stuff work?
Yeah.
And to say you don't want to know. Yeah, we do. No, you don't. Yes, we do. No, you don't. Do you really want to know why it works? I do. And to be able to get your Bible out and say, let me tell you why it works. But let me show you how we got there to find that out.
Yeah.
And so this guy, so he asked me the questions, and he said, and then when I said every time, he said, then why aren't you using this to do city reaching?
Okay.
Why are you only doing it 1 or 2 clients at a time instead of using it in the ministry work you're doing? And that's where the first book came from. Who would really listen to me if they knew who I was? Okay. And then so I took all this material to my pastor, and I asked him, by any chance, is any of this in the Bible? I then took it to 3 other pastors.
Because this is something you've combined your own faith journey with your business background up until this point.
That's correct.
Okay.
And so this is all experiential.
Yeah.
It's the stuff I've done. It's the stuff I've experienced. And so I took it to him, and then I took it to 3 other pastors and asked them, by any chance. And so my pastor came back and handed it back to me and said, you have no idea what you have. I said, so it's in the Bible? He said, yes. And I said, where? He said, go find it yourself.
Oh,
and
interesting.
And then I took it to 3 other pastors who came back to me and told me no. And then they came back 2 weeks later and apologized and said, we've never seen the Bible presented this way before. And so I started really looking at, okay, it's pretty humiliating and humbling when you think you're God's gift to business for so long. And then you find out, hold it, this works for everybody. And then I started, this is crazy, but I had started before that because I had started this ministry. I'd confessed everything to my wife, and she forgave me. So I just started applying it to my own life, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, only 3 short years later, my wife tells me, you're not the same man you used to be. But anyway, it only took 3 years to hear that. But she says it didn't take that long. It just took her 3 years to believe it. And so we started realizing, so I started looking for the scripture. You know, God, where do you say this in your word?
Yeah.
And the Bible just came alive. It just came to life.
Wow.
I went, man, every single answer, all of them, everything, where bone cancer comes from, what causes heart attacks, how to run a business, a classroom, how to be a parent, how to be a husband, how to be a wife. I mean, every answer's in there. And we had just put it in English, not realizing that, we knew it worked, but we didn't realize the biblical foundation it was until later. So then we came up with the second manual, and now the second manual shows where the first manual came from.
Wow.
And so,
but you're able to take this into any situation. Like, so you've been taking it into businesses that have nothing to do with the church. It's all, but it's something that people can really assimilate. And then they can ask you further questions. That's what's been happening. Yeah. That's so amazing.
And then when they do ask the further questions, and I literally will tell them, I promise you don't want to know where it comes from.
It will make you uncomfortable.
But my point is, you know how easy it is when people are begging for the gospel?
Yeah.
When they're saying this stuff works, tell us why it works. And you get your Bible out and you put it on the table. And even when we go into cities and countries and do the training, we call it plain glass and stained glass. Have you ever heard that term?
No.
So our first manual is plain glass.
Okay.
In other words, it basically is given biblical principles, okay, in English.
In English.
In a language you can understand.
Okay.
Okay, how to do a self-evaluation, how to resolve conflict, how to write a personal vision statement, how to remove constraints, how to actually remove anger. We actually have a process we show people how to remove unrighteous anger in your life. And it's a process I came up with because I was like the most angry guy you've ever met. We actually show them so we actually show them the process of how to do that. And so all these things that we've been told about, it's like we actually show them exactly where to find peace in your life. So especially when we get to the Bible, not just that Jesus said it, but exactly where he shows where it is and how to get it. And most of the time, we don't get to hear that in church. We don't get the details. We hear, find a peace that passes understanding, but we skip over the scriptures that show exactly where that is. And so, when they see this and it works in their lives, even without the scripture, then they ask.
Yeah.
And so when we do it in cities and countries, we do plain glass version first.
Okay.
And then then I do a repentance. I have a 6-step apology that I teach. And I do the 6-step apology in front of the class on behalf of Christians by
Really?
by the fact that we don't look or live like what we say. That we take as many antidepressants as you do. Our divorce rate's almost as high as yours. Our road rage is just as bad. And I do the 6-step apology.
You do that in these classroom settings on
After-
behalf of Christians.
As soon as we finish the plain glass model.
Wow.
Okay, so as soon as we finish so we're talking about a citywide event, not in a business. I'll tell you how we do a business later. And then I stand up and say, hey, we just finished the manual. Congratulations. Thanks for coming. Before you leave or before we go to this next break, I'd like to share something with you. And I'd like to talk to 2 groups of people. I'd like to talk to one group that we call ourselves believers and another group who I want to explain to you what that is, but you may not call yourself that.
Okay.
And I tell believers, if what I just taught you is true, and if it truly is a fact that 55% of what you communicate as an individual is through your body language, and 38% is through your tone of voice, and 7% is through your words, that means 93% of everything you communicate comes through your tone and your actions,
Yeah.
and only 7% comes through your words. Now, if that's true,
Now, anyone who's married knows that's true.
knows it's true.
It's just true.
Now, let's apply that to the body of Christ.
Yeah.
That think of us as a body. 93% of what we communicate is communicated through our collective body language and our collective tone of voice, and only 7% through our preaching. Would you be hustling? Would you be running to dive into that body? And the answer is no. Sorry. I'm not saying there aren't parts of the body that you would, but generally, because we're known for what we're against, we're not known for what we're for.
Yeah.
We have Jesus on our bumper stickers, and we're screaming at bad driving. We go to church on Sunday morning, we wave our hands, and we argue with our wife all the way to lunch and scream at our kids about where we're going to have lunch. I mean, we don't look like what we say, and so I repent for that. And so I call these things out, and so I tell that to believers, and I talk to non-believers and explain what that is, what I believe a believer is. And then I repent to them and say, I call those things out, and I say, and we are wrong, and I'm sorry. And if you could find a place in your heart for the next 10 minutes to forgive us, I would ask you to come back to this class. I'd like to show you something maybe in a way you've never seen it before. And I give you permission to hold us accountable, to live up to what we teach. And if there's anything else you want me to apologize for, I'll do it. So it's a 6-step apology.
Wow.
And then I tell them this whacked out story about Jesus.
This
I call it
story?
whacked out.
Okay.
Okay. So.
Okay, I'm really curious about that story.
Okay.
But
Well, you want me to do that now?
yeah, kind of.
Okay. And so I'll tell this story, which is the same thing I do in the business environment. If they ask me, where does this stuff come from? I say, you don't want to know. So I tell the same story.
Yeah.
So in these classes, I say, let me tell you a whacked out story.
Okay.
In the corporate world, I say, let me tell you a whacked out story.
Yeah.
I said, and I said, this whacked, and I pull my Bible out and I lay it out there. And I say, this whacked out story comes out of this book. But
You'll do that in the business world as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Don't waver once they give me no choice.
Yeah.
I mean, you ask, you want to know, I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you. I do it in the government world. I do it everywhere once they ask. And I tell them, so here we go. You ready? Whacked out story. I believe there's this Father and this Son named Jesus and this entity, this power called the Holy Spirit. And I believe this world was created by that. I believe when that happened, that we as men and women, Adam was created in the image of God. And I believe they sinned and the world got all screwed up. And then one day the Father went to the Son in heaven and said, hey, Jesus, would you do me a favor? Would you go down to the earth? And I said, you want to hear what's really whacked out? Not only did he come, he came through a virgin. So this man was born through a woman who's never had sex. Now that sounds whacked out to me,
It does.
but I believe it happened.
It really does.
I said, then he walked around on earth. He got trained up, and for 30 years he made some furniture. And I said, I don't think
chairs.
and I said, he might not have been very good at it because we don't have any antiques with his name on it, but that part doesn't matter. And then I said, for 3 years he had a management team. And his management team, he called the disciples. And I said, and he was only successful with 11 out of 12. So that gives me hope. So you as managers, when you're trying to grow your leaders, think about it. God himself wasn't even successful with all of them. And so I'm telling this story, and I said, and then one day, you ready for this? This man that came out of heaven, born through a virgin, walked on earth. One day they hung him on a cross. And he hung on that cross, he did nothing wrong. They couldn't even find him guilty of anything, and they killed him. I said, and then when he died, they buried him. And you want to hear something really crazy? 3 days later, I believe he rose from the dead. He went and visited his management team a couple more times, and he told them some things.
Yeah.
And then, zip, he went right back to heaven. Now, as crazy as that may sound to you, I believe it's true. And I said, but I got good news for you. The book this story comes out of, that you've been learning from, without even knowing that's what you've been learning from, it actually says it works whether you believe it or not. This God that we have says, my ways are for the righteous, the unrighteous. They're for the just and the unjust. So you don't have to quit using all these tools. They're going to work for you, even if you don't believe that God gave them to you.
Wow.
I said, but I got news for you. If you can accept that that's what it really is and accept the story I just told you, I can show you not only to have a place of eternity in heaven, I can show you how to find that peace that passes understanding.
Wow.
And so all this stuff that you've been doing, it'll stick, and you'll live the rest of your life with it. I said, ain't that a whacked out story?
It is.
So
Man, that's amazing. Did you always think after you stepped away from that company and then you had this radical God encounter that you would be back in the business world to this degree?
Well, I wasn't sure. I do know that in my journal, which was really crazy because I started journaling, okay? I started this ministry in Cincinnati called Transformation Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, bringing leaders together to change the city. Didn't know other people were doing it. I mean, I was just a business guy trying to answer God's call, which was the third time I've been told to do that. When I was a teenager in Paris, Texas, I thought God told me to do that.
To start a ministry.
To start a ministry to bring the leaders together about changing the city.
Okay.
And my pastor said, why would God want to do that, and why would he ask you to do it?
And even back then, it was about bringing leaders together.
It absolutely was. I even asked my high school principal, because I was president of our student body, would he let me use the high school stadium to have a prayer event to bring the leaders together? And he said, will your pastor support you? And I said, no. Then he said, no. And in my mid-30s, same thing happened again in College Station, Texas. Same pastor said, why would God call you to do that?
That's so sad.
It really, but you know, the good news is God uses it all.
Yeah.
And so when it happened again in that room, there was help.
Yeah.
My pastor and his wife were there.
Yeah.
So they knew what God, and then I shared with them later that was the third time that had happened. And so as I stepped out and did that, we had a, and I'll come back to your question, but just you'll get a kick out of this, especially with Iris Ministries. And so I gave a message at the convention center in Cincinnati 4 times in one day about changing the city. So bringing pastors, business leaders, police department, and giving them 4 options of a time to come to hear this vision. And it's on video where I actually stood up and said, hey, don't worry, I'm Southern Baptist. I don't believe in the prophetic, but God sent me here to tell you this. And then I went on to tell them what God sent me to Cincinnati to tell them.
That's incredible.
And a lot of the pastors said, we got on board because we felt sorry for you. I mean, anybody who would come say, I don't believe in prophetic, and then prophesy the way you did, we knew you that at least the innocence was there.
That's incredible.
And so that's what happened.
That's amazing. But, so going back to the question, you launched into ministry as well, side by side.
Full-time ministry, working 4 days a month as a consultant in companies for income.
Okay.
And then when the Lord showed me this was all biblical, I actually invited 30 of my friends into the room, gave them a legal pad and 8 pieces of paper, and said, I want to show y'all something. At the end of it, they said, most life-changing thing we've ever done. And so they asked me, would you do it again? And so brought 30 more people in the room, did it again. Then they said, would you do it again? And so I did this.
And that's kind of the start of this teaching series on transformational leadership.
That was it.
Okay.
There was no PowerPoint. There was no manual. It was a legal pad and a pen. And and then somebody came and they said, how about I help you put a manual together? And I said, hey, I don't have a clue how to do that. And then somebody else came and said, how about we put a PowerPoint together? And then people started coming into Cincinnati from other cities and other countries and going through it and then asking me would I bring it to their city and country. And I said, no, not until my kids get out of school. Really? And I still had a lot of healing. I still need to get my act together. And then one day in Portland, Oregon, we took a big church out there, took hundreds of their leaders through it. And I worked with them for a couple of years. And then one night I was staying in the home with this pastor and his wife. And the wife said to me, who's also a business person, she said, could I share something with you? This is like midnight. And I said, sure. She said, we've brought in almost every leadership training you can think of. We've been to all of them. And she called them all out. And I wouldn't do that because these guys are my heroes. And she said, but we've never seen anything like you have. And I said, okay. And she said, but quite frankly, I'm embarrassed at your presentation.
I'm embarrassed at it?
She goes, not your presentation, but the PowerPoint and the manual that you've developed.
Okay.
And she said, I'm so embarrassed, I probably won't bring other people in from outside
Too
our
rudimentary?
church. Do what? Well, I'll show you the difference sometime when we're off air.
Okay.
All
right.
And she said,
I can imagine.
But she said, but I don't make these kinds of comments unless I'm willing to do something to fix it. And she said, would you let my team and me have your PowerPoint and your manual and let us work on it? And I just slid it across the table to her. And she said, it's that easy for you? I said, I don't own this. I'm just the one that's been given stewardship over it. And they just took it to a complete another level.
Wow. Yeah. This might be a kind of overly simple question, but I don't know. I feel like there's people sometimes who have this really strong call to, say, the business world, but they feel almost as Christians like they should be in ministry, or maybe that's a higher call. Yeah. And in your case, you've done both. But what would you say to people who kind of have that real passion to get into the business world and yet have that kind of, do I need to be in ministry? Do I need to be a pastor? Do you know what I'm getting at? It's...
Yeah, I actually speak on this subject.
Yeah.
To Mission America, I speak on it in other countries. I mean, this exact question, I speak on it.
Yeah.
My belief is that we have made up stuff that's just not true. Like the word lay people doesn't exist in the Bible. Most people don't know that. The word is actually, in Greek, it's actually saints. It's not lay people.
Okay.
And so I meet with leaders, and I mean, I've been to, well, I won't use all the names, but a lot of leaders that I've met with in the last 3 or 4 years from the church, asking them to understand that, 97% of the body of Christ gets their vocational income outside what the traditional full-time pastor, missions person, or ministry leader. Only 3% get their full-time vocational income from doing that.
Yeah.
And I said, because the way we've taught in the church, even I grew up thinking one day you got to quit your job, go to seminary and become a preacher.
Really?
I said, but that's made up.
Yeah.
And I said, when you start realizing that if you're a Christian, you are a shepherd. If you are a shepherd, you are a minister. If you are a minister, you are a pastor. The question is, where do you get your vocational income? And so, I am an ordained pastor also. If you tell anybody, I have to kill us both. But my point is, I commission and ordain business leaders, government leaders, classroom teachers all over the world.
Yep.
That you are a pastor, you are a minister. Now start doing your job like ministers are supposed to, not necessarily like they do, but like they're supposed to.
Right.
And I tell pastors and working with them, start standing up, and every time you celebrate your anniversary, ask anybody here who's been working in your job for 10 years, if you've been a parent for 10 years. If you're going to celebrate 10 years, celebrate everybody's 10-year anniversary as a pastor in whatever their vocation is. Start commissioning them. I teach things like stop closing your worship service with a prayer and start launching them into the world with a prayer. The Bible says everything you do is worship. Romans 12:1 and 2. Everybody knows 12:2, but nobody reads 12:1 very close. But it says, this is your true and proper, let your whole body be a living sacrifice. Everything you do be a living sacrifice. This is your true and proper worship. So everything we do is worship.
Yeah.
I love singing. Corporate worship is critical.
I
love
singing?
Praying. I love being where people are singing. Okay. Nobody loves me being there singing, but I love the corporate
I won't
worship.
ask you to sing.
Okay. I love prayer. Corporate prayer, corporate worship, that is a kind of worship.
Yep.
Preaching is a kind of, when I stand up and do transformational leadership, that is my worship.
Yeah.
Hopefully this is my worship.
Yeah.
Driving my car is my worship. How I'm a parent, how I coach kids in sports. And when I started realizing that everything I do is worship, I started realizing that 97% of us are out in the world, yet we're made to feel guilty, unintentionally, for not being in full-time ministry. And I'm saying it's time for us to start.
Wild.
And I'm saying it's time to start teaching those people in your congregations how to coach kids in soccer on Sunday morning. Because I did that. And so my kids might be in church if I weren't coaching, but the other 14 kids, most of them were not going to be in church. And so I would go coach them on Sunday morning, and before we go play basketball games or soccer games, we go in the hotel room and I do a Bible story with them. And so Jesus says, go out and get them. And so instead of making me feel guilty for missing church on Sunday morning, I'd count you to teach me how to go do church on Sunday morning with other people who aren't going to be there.
Nice.
You know, I would tell pastors, encourage the business people to make as much money as they can in their business and take care of their employees and take care of missions leaders that are doing full-time, because they're full-time too.
Yeah.
And I'd tell the taxi cab driver, if God's called you to drive a taxi, be the best, safest taxi driver you can be the kindest, gentlest, peace, patience, hope, and joy, long-suffering, goodness, faithfulness, love, pour it into them, and just see if they don't ask you why you are being so kind to them, and you can lead them to Jesus. So no matter where you are, you're a pastor.
Wow.
It's that simple. And that's part of the message of transformational leadership.
That's awesome. And how can people get a hold of this material in your books, and where should they go?
Okay. Well, we have two websites. One is called transformlead.com.
Transformlead.com.
Right. And so there's the stuff about the consulting, the executive coaching, if you want a keynote speaker, those kinds of things, or if you want the training brought into your organization, or even if you want to bring us to your city to do it, all that's on that website. And then we have one called TL, Transform Leadership, TLOnDemand.com.
TLOnDemand.com.
Right. And then on that website, you actually can get the training that we go into cities and do on a virtual interactive training platform. And
you have books as well?
Yeah, and then we have a book that, when we first started doing transformational leadership, it was the name of something. Transformational, you can get your nose transformed, your ears transformed, you can get everything transformed, your house transformed. And so it's become such a genre that we've decided not to change the name of the training, but in the book, instead of writing another book on transformational leadership, because this is very different. I can promise you when people come and read it and see it, they go, okay, this is nothing like what we've seen before.
Yeah.
We called the book Relational Leadership.
Reactional leadership?
No, Relational.
Oh, Relational.
Can I show it real quick?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, show it.
So people can see it if you don't mind. I'm not trying to promote it. I'm just trying to explain the name.
This one.
Okay.
Relational.
So if you see the word relational leadership, okay, in life there's this thing called the relationship continuum. And on one end are people that are highly relational. On the other end are people that are highly task-oriented or are highly transactional. And they don't get along very well, usually. They drive each other crazy. I'd say probably, I'm guessing just based on our classes, 80 to 90% of marriages have one on one end and one on the other. That's pretty normal. And so what we try to do is through transformational leadership is teach relational people how to be more transactional without giving up their natural bent to be relational. And highly transactional people, how to be more relational without giving up their natural bent to be transactional, and we call that being relational.
I love that.
And so, but you'll see the transformational leadership stuff at the bottom. But it's the transformational leadership training basically in the form of a book.
Nice. Okay. I love it. You guys have got to check it out. I need to check it out. Definitely inspired.
Look here.
Yes.
There's a gift. You have one. You can check it out now.
That's awesome. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for being here. I do want to shift gears for a second and ask you a few informal questions.
Oh,
if
let's
that's
do
okay.
it. I love it.
Is it true that you were a disco dance teacher?
You did this. You're going to do
so
this, aren't you?
I'm so excited about this fact.
Yeah, when I was in college, I went dancing one night, and literally I was out dancing, and I was doing country and western dancing. And another couple came up to me and my partner and said, would you like some help?
Some help?
Because I was pretty bad.
Okay.
And so they taught us how to do country and western, and I just loved it. And so I just kind of became a dancer. And then
it's kind of in you.
Well, and then when disco came out, I started disco dancing. And then all of a sudden I found myself competing, and then I got a call from the
This is amazing.
From the university asking if I would teach disco dancing.
Is this pre-business school?
I was in college.
You were in college.
I was still in college when I started.
Okay.
And then from there,
awesome.
When I graduated, my wife was a freshman when I met her, and I was a senior. So I stayed in town waiting for her to graduate because her bucket list was to graduate from Texas A&M. And so I started teaching my senior year, and she actually helped me teach the first class, even not knowing how to dance.
Right. Really quick, because your dance partner bailed on you in the car on the way to
Actually,
the class,
not in the
right?
car, in
Not
the
car.
hallway,
Oh my goodness.
walking into the class.
Okay.
She said,
Your competitive dance partner
yeah, we competed together.
bailed on you.
And she bailed on me walking into the class, and I actually told her, if you're going to walk out, I mean, you have to understand, I was like I told you a while ago, Google arrogance and all that stuff, and my picture comes up, and I told her, go ahead and leave. I could do this with somebody who's never danced before. And she did. She walked out.
And she walked out.
And so I got Sandra, who was in the class.
Who you weren't dating her yet?
We had just started.
Okay.
I mean, literally, I met her on December the 3rd. The year before, went home for Christmas, came back and was dating her in January. And
She's
that's when
taking the class
started.
and finds out she's helping you.
So she's taking the class. I went out to her. I said, look, I know you've never done this, but is there any chance you'd come help me? So I pulled her up on stage, and so she learned it as we were teaching it.
It's a beautiful
And then we
story.
taught dance together for 18 years after that.
18 years. You did that on the side.
Well, we did that until we moved to Cincinnati. So as long as we were living in Texas, but once I started commuting. And I commuted for 23 months, which made it impossible to teach in Texas and be in Cincinnati.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
But we love to dance still, absolutely.
Oh, I love that. That's so fun. What's your favorite Disney movie?
Well, my favorite Disney movie, and I'm going to say it the way I heard it the first time. You ready?
Yeah.
Is The Little Mermaid.
Oh.
And the
Is
reason,
a daughter?
the reason is I'll never forget. I mean, I will never forget this. I'm a huge sports fan. I mean, I love college
What's
football.
your favorite sport?
Love college football.
Okay.
Then college basketball.
Okay.
Okay. And then then women's college basketball is my third favorite. And then probably college baseball. And then it goes to sports.
Okay.
Well, actually, I'm falling in love with cricket and rugby now that I'm traveling the world so much. So
nice.
they're moving up the list.
Nice.
But it was Super Bowl Sunday.
Okay.
And when the Super Bowl was about to come on, and my 3-year-old daughter came and crawled in my lap and asked me, because we just bought the Disney movie, could we watch Little Mermaid? And so for the first time in my life, I didn't watch the Super Bowl. I watched Little Mermaid with my daughter. And so that's always been my favorite Disney movie ever since that happened.
It's like making me cry. That's so cute.
but
That's
that's
my
why-
daughter's age. That's the sweetest.
So go watch Little Mermaid with her. I mean, it's. But yeah, so ever since then, that's been my favorite.
And it was worth
Disney
it.
movie. Yeah.
It was worth it.
Absolutely. And of course, now we've watched how many Disney movies together?
Oh, I love it. Okay, just a couple more. If you could pursue any other profession, what would it be?
Wow, man, I love what I do. I love what God has me doing. I can tell you I have so many prophetic words that I'm trying to avoid, okay?
Okay.
But they involve politics.
Oh,
And
I can see this.
And so I have this talk that I give called the Leadership Crisis. And we have a leadership crisis in our country. We have it in our government, in our churches. We have it in our homes. And I truly believe that the crisis is based on the fact that we have developed a leadership concept and leaders that were really like I was 20 years ago, that we care more about how we look or how people see us than we do the people who follow us. And this material actually fixes that. And so would I choose that? Absolutely not. If God called me to that, He called me to this, but business would be my choice. That's what I'm gifted at. It comes easy. I mean, some people can cook a cake. Showing people how to run a business is easy.
Yeah.
For me,
you
but anyway, that's probably what I'd pick is go back and own a company. But I love what I do. I love God being in charge of it. I love me not having to own it, that He owns it. So it'd be hard to do much else without Him saying, go do something different.
I love
But
it.
if He wanted to use that influence in a specific sphere, I would be obedient to it.
Yeah, it's awesome. And final question.
Okay.
What are you most excited about for 2018?
Well, this is going to sound crazy. When Iris asked me to come do this training, and I was talking with the team about it, I was really praying, God, am I supposed to do this one or soon? Because we have a lot of people now that do this training that we've been teaching and training on as the growth. And I felt like God said, you're supposed to do this one. And Saturday night, Last Saturday night before I came to do the training, I was supposed to leave on the plane Sunday. I threw a vertebrae out of my back and couldn't walk, couldn't sit up, couldn't. Right. And I literally was praying, God, if I'm really supposed to go do this one, you're going to have to do a miracle before tomorrow morning, because we were down to calling the ambulance to get me out of the hotel room, my wife and my daughter and I. And I just said, if I'm really supposed to be there, you're going to have to do it. And if not, we'll just have to get somebody else to go at the last minute. And, by God's grace, a phone call to a doctor, my 6'1" daughter who helped me carry my luggage and put me in a wheelchair and put me on a plane. By God's grace, I was able to stand up Monday and Tuesday for 2 days and do this training. And I'm excited about what God might be doing with that.
That's awesome.
So I really am. There's something going on, and whatever that is, and if they tell me don't ever come back, I'll be okay with that. But I'm excited about
You're coming back.
I'm excited about what God may do with this combination with what's happening here this week.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. I love it. Thank you for coming, not only for the training, but for the podcast and for giving us your time. I know it's valuable. And thank you. You're such an inspiration. Please look him up, Ford Taylor. Get his book. I'm so inspired to read it as well. And thank you to all of our listeners. If you have comments, questions you'd like to hear us ask people, leave those in the comment section under our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our podcast, Iris on iTunes or where you get your podcasts. And until next time.
This podcast is presented by Iris Global. For more information or to support the work of Iris Global, please visit us online at irisglobal.org.